They're pretty great, aren't they? Over this past year, I've definitely had more appreciation for them than I've probably had most of my life. And did you know that there is a place in Oxford with a pretty wild collection of trees? On this episode of the Oxford Sparks Big Questions podcast, we are venturing outside and we are asking, what's an arboretum anyway? Hello, I'm Emily Elias, and this is the show where we seek out the brightest minds at the University of Oxford, and we ask them the big questions. And for this one, we've not only found a tree expert, but some pesky peacocks.
As to how to do it. Yeah, that was our peacocks. They have a habit of doing that, coming up behind people and, making their presence known.
Amazing.
Yeah. So my name is Ben Jones and I'm the curator of the Arboretum, and that's part of the University of Oxford Botanic Garden and Arboretum. And we're based just outside the city at Newnham Courtney. And essentially, as my role as curator, I have the responsibility for managing the living collections, the trees and shrubs that form part of the Arboretum.
Okay, first of all, what the heck is an arboretum?
So an arboretum is a collection of woody plants, so trees and shrubs. This arboretum here, the Harcourt Arboretum, the site is 130 acres and comprises of wildflower meadows, of semi-natural woodland, and then the historic landscape, which is the more formal part of the Arboretum. And the best way I can describe an arboretum is to compare it to almost like a living library. So the trees and shrubs that form part of the Arboretum all have a label on and will have their scientific names, their common names, countries where you would find those species normally. But we also have like a plant records database, and in that database, linked to each of those individual trees and shrubs, is a wealth of data which could range from fieldwork notes, so what was growing with those plants when we collected the seed, through to more of a management set of notes around any works that we've carried out on those trees.
Why would you need to keep all of this together in one place?
I suppose it's a little bit like medical records. Having that data builds a picture for us, but it also forms a really valuable resource in terms of teaching, research, engagement with our visitors. And I think also a lot of this information becomes more valuable the longer that time goes on. So for example, we record temperature. We have various sensors across the site that's recording the temperature every 15 minutes. And over 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, that data becomes more and more valuable and can inform a whole range of things, from horticultural management of the site through to how climate change is affecting plants. So I'm kind of like a librarian, but of trees and shrubs, if that makes sense.
And there are a lot of trees here. You've got some towering redwoods that I'm used to seeing back on the west coast of Canada.
Not too far from where we're stood at the moment, we have a Juniperus procera, which is an East African conifer, and in fact has grown from seed collected on Mount Kilimanjaro. And
you've got this whole range of Japanese trees and shrubberies that not only look pretty, but they have these distinct needles and leaves that you just don't see in the UK.
Again, this is kind of one of the values of the site, I believe, is that, if I go by the books, you wouldn't plant it, because Benson down the road is often the coldest spot in the country. In the winter of 2010 into 11, it went down to minus 21. And yet I got conifers growing here from East Africa, from Brazil, all over the world. For me, that's really exciting to kind of, watch these plants, watch them grow and develop and see how they respond.
How did this site get started?
So the Harcourt family built the big house in Newnham Courtney in the early 18th century. And during that period of time, there was this real fascination of, with plants that were coming in and it was one way of displaying one's wealth. So in the early 19th century, the Harcourt family started acquiring plants that were coming in from the Pacific Northwest or different parts of the world.
And it then fell into the university's hands?
Yes, so sort of ownership has sort of chopped and changed over the years. During the Second World War, the RAF had the big house and operated out of there, analysing aerial photographs that were taken over mainland Europe. But ultimately, by the time we hit the late 50s, early 60s, the Botanic Garden bought what we now know to be the Arboretum. And the reason they did that was because it meant that as a department we could broaden the range of plants we could grow. The Arboretum actually as a site has quite acidic soil, which is very rare, very unusual for Oxfordshire. And so you can grow rhododendrons, camellias, all manner of things that typically you couldn't elsewhere in the county.
You've obviously not been here since the 1960s, otherwise a heck of some plastic surgery that's gone on.
Yeah, aged very well. Yeah.
So when you're, as a curator of this collection, obviously you're adding to it. How do you even tackle a job like that, to be adding to this incredible space that already has so many trees and bushes and plants and flowers?
We have these sort of different sort of core themes for our collections, both here and at the garden, which are around taxonomy and evolution, conservation and biodiversity, heritage and landscape. And so within that, I can then apply those themes to the Arboretum. And there are many things that I have to consider, from biosecurity and plant health, climate change, the age structure of the collection. And within that, I then build into the collection, sort of new trees and shrubs to sort of enhance the Arboretum, but in line with that sort of vision and strategy.
And tucked away from the public, Ben shows me the future additions to the Arboretum.
So we're in the nursery, and this is the structure that we're in is called a shade frame. So we receive plants at a point where they just require one more season in this sort of environment where they're on an irrigation system, and then after one growing season in here, they're then at a stage that they can be planted out in the Arboretum.
And it kind of looks like a mini garden center about the size of a bedroom. There's just rows and rows of little trees and little black pots, but these are not your average trees.
In and amongst us, just looking at what we've got in front of us, we have, I only know the scientific name of this. This is Eupetelia polyandra, which is an endemic tree from Japan. But, we've got some other things that people would be perhaps more familiar with. We have Pyrrhus japonica. We've got some oaks. We've got some maples, liquid amber. We've got some sorbus.
When you're planning to put something into the Arboretum, and you're looking at that sort of that vision, obviously you're not planning for like next spring, next summer, here's some pretty flowers for people to enjoy. What kind of scale are you working on?
Yeah, so my vision, my timeline really has to be 100, 150 years. When we plant these trees, the hope is that they're going to be there for 100, 150 years or more. And so that has to be, our vision really, because it's great that we can visit the Arboretum, see these great big, 30, 40 metre tall trees, and enjoy those treescapes. As curator, I need to ensure that grandchildren, great-grandchildren, if not beyond, can have a similar experience in years to come. And so there is a very fine balance between keeping our visitors safe, which means having to take out some of these big old trees sometimes. But we have a responsibility to find kind of uses for those trees when they come down, but it also gives us a great opportunity for planting new material that hopefully will be here for decades, if not more, to come. We've got material that has grown from seed collected probably of 6 different continents. Our sort of flagship project, if you like, is sort of focused on Japan. And so we've got plants here that, critically endangered or endangered in the wild, that are now growing successfully here, sort of forming, hopefully, the Arboretum of the future.
Now, when you say critically endangered, usually that's something in my mind that goes straight towards like animals, like rhinos and tigers and that sort of thing. But you can have critically endangered trees. How does that work?
This is a very good point, actually, and it's something I often talk about, which is that if we go and ask, members of the public to name an animal threatened with extinction, we're able to do so with relative ease. Rhinos, tigers, lions, etc. That's fairly easy for people to grasp. But globally, 2 in 5 plant species are threatened with extinction. And if we ask people to name a plant that is threatened with extinction, I wonder how good a response that we would get. And in order to try and sort of tackle that, I've thought long and hard about how we kind of make it sort of feel or sound less abstract especially with plants. And so I made a list of sort of 20 trees that we have growing at the Arboretum here, and some of which don't exist in the wild anymore. Thinking on this, I realised that if all of those trees turned into their animal counterpart, we'd have the most amazing zoo. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, conduct what's called red list assessments, and that's where experts will assess flora or fauna in terms of their conservation assessment. And that's where you get critically endangered or endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, etc. So with that list of trees, I then looked up their conservation status, and then using that conservation status, I aligned them with their animal counterpart, if you like. And we've developed a trail here, the Threatened Tree Trail. And so, for example, the giant redwood from California is as threatened as the blue whale. Monkey puzzles that are fairly commonly planted in the UK in gardens, that is as endangered as a rhino, in fact. And so my hope is by making that comparison, putting it into that sort of context, that it just becomes a little bit more prominent in people's mind, and hopefully whilst they're here at the Arboretum enjoying the peacocks or the bluebells and so forth, people can, in a fun way, I hope, sort of learn something about the fragility of plants.
I know you're a future man. Like, that's probably somewhere in your job description, is it you think about the future.
Yeah.
What does this place look like in 150 years?
I certainly hope that the Arboretum is still here and with a very strong tree collection, and is still being utilised by the university, and but also is a place for the public to come and unwind and relax and enjoy and engage with nature. I was going to say I'd still like to see peacocks in the Arboretum, but maybe they won't be here in 150 years.
This podcast was brought to you by Oxford Sparks from the University of Oxford, with music by John Lyons, and a special thanks to Ben Jones and all the folks at the Arboretum. And if you want to learn more about Ben's endangered tree list and their animal counterparts, just go to our website, oxfordsparks.ox.ac.uk. Or if you just want to check out some pretty pictures of those peacocks, we've got those on all of our social media places. Just search at Oxford Sparks. I'm Emily Elias. Bye for now.